one of the issues that's going to be prevalent is the relationship with vendors and the vendor's responsibility in helping you and you helping them manage your inventory levels. So again, we will go around the table, and I'm trying to get a gauge on how you work with vendors, what the communication is to vendors, how responsive vendors are to your needs, and how the whole dynamic is evolving and working out right now with regard to your needs. So we'll start this time with Nancy. Talk about that vendor interaction with regard to understanding and managing your inventory levels.
Okay. We have, I think, a pretty good relationship with most of our vendors, especially the ones who have reps who come into our store. Sometimes there are issues with companies that their reps won't come into our store, and those are always the ones that are a challenge to try to figure out what to do with. But I guess I have never gone to the vendors and asked for assistance if we have things that don't sell. So especially our high-end items, if we end up having to clearance them, I lose money on them. So that's probably one of those things that I should be reaching out to the vendors and saying, hey, this didn't move, I've had it here for X amount of time, and I just have never done that, never felt comfortable doing that.
I have not had problems with the vendors, when I communicate with them, and they've been very supportive to me, and sometimes they give you a little hard time over terms and things like that. The first purchase has to be on a credit card. Well, I have good records. I've been in business 17 years, and besides that, prior to that, I've been pretty successful in other businesses. But there I have a little bit of a hard time with some of them, working with terms and all that. If I have items that are not selling, I've not gone to the vendors to deal with it.
Yeah, I haven't really gone. I think I'm new. Have pretty good relations with the vendors. That it's great when they come to the store.
I really look at it as a partnership, and I have wonderful, wonderful vendor partners. I cherish each one of my vendors, and they are excellent, and I take that very seriously. And when it comes to paying bills, like you were saying, I think I have a responsibility on my end, and I try to my best to hold up my integrity on my end. I do expect the same integrity from my vendor, and it's just like a relationship I have with my customers. They trust me, and I'm going to make sure that that customer, it works. And when I feel a vendor is definitely not doing that and not really supporting my particular concerns, I think that's a breakdown. And I have fired some vendors. Now, not all vendors have I fired because of that, because sometimes it's just not the right mix, it's just not the right product. I have had some vendors who really do not understand that I can't have something sitting around, and if a program, and I was willing to step out to do this program, and it isn't going to be correct for my particular area, I appreciate the vendors, especially when we get into tabletop or we get into some of the other categories, such as just something as simple as recipe cards. They're changing patterns all the time, and when those patterns change and stuff, then I appreciate a little markdown money, which is what I get, some markdown money or whatever they can do.
We're constantly looking at our assortments. We're typically having at least an annual, if not twice a year, line reviews with our vendors, actively looking at our inventory and our SKUs, seeing what's working, what's not working, working with the vendor to either balance inventories or work on markdowns or markdown, dollars or markdown allowances to help keep our inventory in check. But it's really ultimately in the best interest of everybody to do so. Sometimes it's easier if the vendor takes the product back. Sometimes it's easier for us to just liquidate it and just trying to figure out a solution that works with them as far as how that liquidation takes place. Because we're always looking at, asking the questions, you know, what are your top sellers? What are your top sellers in our in our category?
Right.
You know, what is someone, you know, what are other stores who are successful with the line? You know, so trying to figure out both what some of the differences are in performance, and, you know, determining how we fit into that equation.
Again, when you have so many vendors in a store, I find that there's just a real lack of documentation in a lot of these vendors that, you know, I have no idea what vendors you can have a buyback program, or what vendors, you know, if there is such a program, what are the terms of it? Who pays for shipping? You know, how is this processed? And a lot of it is just pretty simple to do, you know, having each vendor have, you know, a certain amount of documentation for these things and make it available. It's one thing that, you know, because we are a tiny business, we have to operate as efficiently as possible, and putting time-saving implementation, you know, processes in place is a big part of what I do in running our store, just because, again, we run on a shoestring budget and with a tiny staff, so these things have to be in place and have to almost be automated, to where if I have an employee that just says, like, if a general manager comes to me and says, this is not moving, I have to be able to say, okay, look in this book, or look in this Dropbox file and see what their return policies are and things like that.
A lot of it goes to your relationship with your reps and your vendors. I mean, going to a lot of the shows, sometimes things that you forget aren't moving, or you don't feel comfortable enough talking to your rep about, the vendor will say, hey, how's that moving? And you're going, it's not. And
then what happens?
They'll jump in.
Yeah.
I just had that happen the other night. I mean, you know, brought in some stuff, thought it was really going to be great. Vendor's asking, how's it going? And he said, we'll do something. You know, we'll get you some help.
You know, it's interesting. I feel as though you've got the big chain stores on one side, they say jump, the vendor says how high. And I kind of feel like the vendor says jump and I say how high. Now maybe it's because I spread it among too many different vendors, but am I that important on a dollar figure to each vendor? There's a few of them, yeah, but probably because I have such a wide assortment of stuff, I might not have as huge of an importance, and I don't feel as though, you know, I think that sometimes the vendors are a little cagey about what they're willing to do. They almost don't want me to know that they're going to take back product. If I ask while they're trying to sell me something, then maybe I can get them to do something with the inventory I have. But typically, they're not the ones coming to me and saying, how can we grow the business? What can we do? It's really in a much more kind of reactive as opposed to proactive, and almost as if they don't, many of them, not all of them, but many of them don't want me to know that they're even willing to do such a thing.
Let's tackle appliances for a second, because that's an interesting category for most of you in terms of your margins can be a little compressed in that business. So, you know, but you're also going to possibly see slower turn rates in that business too. Who's got an interesting story about how you manage your particularly your big ticket appliance inventory in terms of keeping it efficient and making sure you're in stock? Anyone?
Well, it's really an expensive business to be in that category, and you know, I would love, as small electrics, I would love for vendors to be sending me cord-clipped items to put on my shelf, and they don't do it. So if I'm ordering a case pack of 4 or 2, what have you, I got to have one out of the box and the other one's in. That costs me a lot of money. So honestly, one of the ways I manage it is to tell my employees, we go through, we find one left, box it. It's got to be, because no one wants to say, oh, I want that item. Do you have? Well, I don't want that one that's sitting on the shelf. It's in perfectly fine condition and it's covered by warranty, but they don't want that. I don't blame them. I probably wouldn't either. So honestly, when there's one left, we have to box it up, because I have to, you know, I can't keep in stock on all of them, and that's all I have left until I do my next reorder.
The thing that we have to recognize is that every product has a cycle on its own. And I do love my function, and I did try to sit down from a business idea to understand what my function is. The function of a small business is more of a pioneer function. We generally find what's cool. We are, to me, the kind of classy place that people are interested in, and when you have a cool electric appliance, I think we can be the ones to really show that off. And as it becomes popular and that becomes changing, I realize that it becomes more of a commodity item. That's when it starts going out there. And we need to realize that we've done our job and move on. And that's one thing really important to understand where you are in a product cycle. And the vendor needs to understand that as well.
How do you benchmark against when it's been sitting there too long? When does the alarm go off? I'm not necessarily talking about appliances right now. It could be anything. And how do you kind of establish a benchmark in terms of, okay, the turns have gone from X to X. We're just not getting that volume, or we're not getting that turn rate anymore, and we've got to shift it around. Doug, how do you kind of create kind of an internal benchmark to understand the movement of your goods?
Yeah, so we do again annual category reviews.
Yeah.
So we're taking a look at the category, and you're looking at multiple elements from, how important is the product as part of your, identity? Is that assortment that you want to keep, and what are you willing to invest into those types of products, as well as, products which create the volume and the turns that you're looking for. So we tend to take a look at it category by category, and obviously you have different expectations from turns and gadgets than you do in countertop appliances.
It is, depending on the product, if it goes to our identity. I mean, many of the electrics, higher end electrics, I don't expect as big a turn. If it's a gadget, if it's been there, and the lesser value items, if it's consumable, how much is it how many are going out of date? Right. That, before we can sell it.
As deciding if something's been in the store too long, I figure if you have it during a holiday season and it isn't moving, it's time to get it out of there, because if it doesn't go during the holiday season, it's not ever going to go.
I think, when you look at it from a business perspective, however, let's do a little bit of basic math. If you had $200,000 worth of inventory, just throwing out a figure, and you sat back and you said, okay, I'm going to have this product mix. If you do $100,000 of that inventory can turn 3 times, and it's a keystone, and I'm just gonna work off of keystone market just because it's easier in math. Then that $100,000 would probably generate around $600,000 a year. That would be 3 turns. The other $100,000, if it did 1 turn, that's $200,000. So therefore, $200,000 worth of inventory should be able to generate approximately $800,000 of sales. It's very simple math. And when I sit back and I look at it, I have to determine, and I do that with my store. That's how I analyze it. So I take my inventory and I say, okay, is this a 1-turner type of thing, or is this a 3-turner? Because the mix itself is what attracts the bees to the hive. And I think you have to have that buzz in your store. So a very classy, from my perspective, okay, a very intensive, technical type of product, such as an automatic coffee maker. Sure, it may not have certain turns all the time, all throughout the year. However, it's the buzz that keeps us going.
This industry is very focused on turns, and if the big stores, they're doing it all by the numbers, and they're focused on turns, and I need to differentiate myself. Then yes, I need things that turn quickly, but I also need the product that my customers can't find anywhere, because everybody else is obsessed with turns. And so if it doesn't, for me, it's oftentimes a square footage calculation. Like if it doesn't take up much space, I can get it on the peg. I can
compromise a little bit to be different.
Yeah, I'll say, you know what? Yeah. Well, because the customer comes in and they find it, they're grateful. Okay. They're excited to find it. They're happy to come. And now what happens is they come to my store first. But what I need for the items that don't turn well is at least a couple items from that vendor that does. Because if I don't have a really high turning item from that vendor, I'm not ordering them from them frequently enough, and I'm not able to keep what I need in stock.
It's an interesting situation where I have to drive foot traffic. And one of the things that I love about being a small business is that you can pivot so quickly. And I think big box stores just cannot do that, and they'll never be able to do that. So one thing that we're doing right now is we're looking at what's selling, what's not, and we're really reassessing what we are as a business. And I think you can be a kitchen store, but you can be more than that at the same time. That's why we're bringing in wine. That's why we're boosting our consumables, and that's why we're doing something really strange and putting in a commercial kitchen and going to start a small plate menu.
Let's shift a little bit to some of the basic blocking and tackling with regard to inventory management. And that's how you order, how you plan, how fast can you replenish. So, you know, when is the typical order placed? How far out in terms of will you make a commitment to goods right now? I keep hearing in all facets of the business that window is obviously shrinking because you want to be closer. You want your inventory to be closer to the order. You want your sale, your sell-through to be closer to the replenishment. So let's just go around the table quickly. Kind of describe your typical ordering process, when you make your commitments, when you expect delivery, and how quickly can you replenish when you are facing an out-of-stock possibility right now. Nancy?
We have an inventory system where, of course, I'm working off. I run printouts, and I'm working off of my printouts, and so I have history and that sort of thing as I'm looking through it. As far as and we do, I don't order it until I need it, because if you're paying by the square foot for retail space, you can't give that much to storage, because you're not making any money on that storage space. I love the ones where I place the order one day, it ships the next, and I've got it 2 or 3 days later. That's an ideal situation. It doesn't happen the majority of the time. Majority of the time, you're at least 2 weeks out on things, which I don't understand. I feel like if they've got an order in house, why does it take a week to get it out of the warehouse? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. Seems to me like more lately where a lot of issues with back orders, because they'll offer you a free freight for your order, but then you've got back orders dribbling in for 6 months that no longer meets the criteria for free freight, and you end up paying. I had to call a vendor the other day. I said, you have to cancel everything. It's cost me 22 to 25% freight to get those back orders. So that's an issue.
I have a lot of my vendors. I pretty much, if I know I'm placing an order on Monday, I expect it to be there by Wednesday, or I know this company is going to take a week. So I try to stay ahead of it if things are getting really low, and just make myself familiar with the timing of when how long certain vendors take.
I'm in the store every day, so my visual is my first clue that I need to reorder, and then I check the computer but we haven't had a problem with timing, big delays. Good. Because we stay on top of it.
Well, it's a hard question to answer because it's a dance, and so many vendors are different. So you have to learn the rhythm of your vendor, and vendors that are clear, it's really helpful. So I would say, speaking to vendors, that clarity is always perfect, because some definitely have popular merchandise. They're very delayed on their shipping, and so I have to factor in, okay, this particular vendor, I wrote an order in Chicago and just got the order, in July, and felt pretty good about it because I know it's hot, and being able to do it. Those type of things we need to forecast. We have lots of pre-bookings. I have lots. There's not a day that goes by generally that I'm not ordering something, but I have had to just learn the rhythm of each vendor, and that just takes time and patience. And I make notes on vendors in my computer system of not only my terms and this, but also approximately what is their shipping lead time. Is it 2 weeks? Is it 3 weeks? Is it a few days? Is it several months?
Along with our systems, we use min-max for pretty much all our products. So we're looking both at what's in a sense coming up for suggested order. Are you hitting minimums? And if so, is that item or category of importance at that time period? Right. So even though you may have a min point, if you're not meeting the vendor minimum, right? Or if you're working off I actually find it sometimes, it's great when the vendor has a program, but many times like the vendor programs put hiccups in your inventory because you're either waiting for program to start or you just brought in so much on program that, you know, if you miss an item or they missed an item,
this is a way to kind of balance the programmed approach versus kind of an instinct and kind of a feel, touch and feel
approach. You can't
approach.
get back in stock on it. So, because it's either not on program or you bought so much that, you know, you only need one item and they're not going to ship you.
Right.
So I feel like there's an opportunity that when you have substantial programs or that vendors looking to work off of a program like that, that they need to have a contingency or plan B, which says that, hey, you know, we realize you just, our normal order is $1,000, but you just bought $30,000. If you need this one item, we'll ship it to you.
We're pretty tech savvy in the store, and you know, I have a POS system that does automatically generate purchase orders based on, you know, reorder points that I set, and that really does help. And you know, we can kind of forecast, you know, fourth quarter sales and things like that. A lot of times where we really come up with issues has to do with order minimums and things like that, especially when it comes to special order programs. Because we're so small, we just can't really have everything in stock all at once. I mean, we're tiny. And so, you know, customers really want to come to me in special order items, and even if they have to wait 2 weeks, a lot of times they're fine with that. But a lot of times there are some vendors, especially when it comes to like cookware, appliances, and your big ticket items, that just hitting the minimum order on a single appliance or a single piece of cookware can be very difficult. And also, a lot of times those same vendors have longer lead times than what the customer is willing to wait for. Some sort of really good quick ship, drop ship program or a special order program would be very, very nice, because I find that a lot of the vendors that really ship consistently really quickly are actually small little gadgety stuff that people don't normally special order.
It goes fairly well. I mean, having been in business, you know who you need to order from on a more frequent basis. You know, I get the same problems that everybody else does. You've placed an order and, you know, I might have 2 of something and they both sell the next day.
Right.
So, you know, and then the vendor replenishment because, you know, I only need the one item. I mean, you know, but it is, as Art called it, a dance. I mean, you know, I have those vendors that I know, you know, hey, I'm going to order often. They are gadgets, they are consumables usually. And then, you know, the cookware and the larger ones, you know, you're trying to kind of follow their programs because the markup is not there as much.
I don't like to pre-book. I want to be more nimble than that. I like to be able to change with the times, change with things that happen, and really carry, as much as possible, the minimum amount of merchandise I need. If I'm guessing what I need down the road, it doesn't work as well for me. I like to be like, okay, I need it, let's place the order and do it that way. I know my vendors would love it if I pre-booked, and I understand, but it just tends not to work well for me. And I think that everyone either has a cooking philosophy to buying or a baking philosophy to buying. It can be a science or it can be an art. I would love it if my brain was more mathematic and science, but for me it's a lot on just feel and instinct and gut, and I treat it more like an art. And I think if the vendor knows, if they're dealing with a buyer that's kind of more of a cook or more of a baker in that sense, then they can kind of relate a little bit easier. Some of my best-selling items were risks that I didn't think were going to sell, and I thought I was going to have to clearance them out in 6 months, and they end up being my biggest vendors. You don't know. I mean, we have the ability, we don't have to buy 500 units to try something. So I can try things all the time and just kind of go with the feeling, and if it works, great. If not, we'll move on.
Let's stay on risk for a second, because you're a channel that often is counted on by the vendor community and your customers for taking chances on newer things and being ahead of the curve sometimes, more or less risk averse. Quickly, Nancy.
Anytime you bring in a new line or a new vendor, it's obviously risky. And I think it goes purely back to you knowing your customer base and being able to use your gut. That's when anytime you're bringing in something new, it's a gut thing. You've got to figure out, you got to know your customers in order to figure that out. I kind of always go at it as almost anything will sell at 50% off. So if I can at least get Keystone on it where I'm not losing money whenever I'm getting my money back, I'm good with the risk.
I've become probably less risk averse, but the demands on me are to be more risk averse. I think risk is just a part of the world that we live in, like you said. But in this business, I will come to market with an idea that I'm going to spend several $1,000s, and that might not work. It may not stick to the wall when I throw it. But to answer the question about being artistic and having the flash that Ben was talking about, it's very necessary for us to understand our function in the marketplace, and our function is to bring product to the marketplace that lots of the other people cannot bring. We're kind of bringing in that spark, and I understand that, and usually we get at least a winner or two a year, and that's what we're looking for, and we're always looking for that new winner in the spark, and I'm willing to take that risk to get it, because when you get it, that thing doesn't turn 3 times, it turns 10, it turns 12, it turns wonderful.
With any business, that is risk. So what I try to do is try to mitigate those risks as best as I can. And a lot of that comes from product knowledge, trying to stay up on trends, but it also has a lot to do with knowing your customer base. And you can, when you get that gut feeling, you know when something's going to do well or when it's not. And more often than not, when I brought in products that just fell flat, it's because I went against my gut instinct, and I went with something a rep was telling me, oh yeah, this is blowing out. And it's like,
Probably willing to take a greater risk closer to fourth quarter when you've got the foot traffic. The other is it something the customer's been asking for? I mean, again, we try to track, what are the customers asking for? We keep a recipe box of requests. I mean, sometimes it's as simple as, an item from a vendor you only can order from a couple times a year because they're on the West Coast and freight. So we keep that information. I go to that whenever I'm placing orders. I go to that box. What's been requested?
Anybody becoming more proactive with regard to dropship programs as a way to either mitigate out of stocks on a product that may be quote unquote out of stock, or to get into some new ideas, new categories, new products where you don't want to necessarily make that inventory commitment, and our vendors cooperating with you on that.
I find dropship difficult because it requires a lot of paperwork and a lot of follow-up, and for me, I've found that I'll do it with certain items and certain vendors, but I know that it keeps us nimble, and that the answer should be that I want to do it, but I really don't, because of the amount of, I don't have a lot of staff, and the amount of work that I find to maintain the dropship programs and follow up and make sure it all works and make sure that the customers got it, because it gets lost in the warehouse sometimes. It's just, I find unfortunately, it oftentimes turns more into a headache than a profit center.
Sometimes our customers just want to come in and they want to have somebody to talk to about it.
Right.
And when they've done that and they've checked, and found that we are the same price, they're like, I want to support local.
Right.
So we will get that.
especially if you're in tabletop.
With many patterns and things like
right.
that.
You cannot have all these patterns and stuff in stock. It's unreasonable, especially with like a bridal program. Well, a bride may register for a dozen place settings. Do you order in the dozen place settings before they've sold, or do you wait and then send it afterwards and take orders? And when it comes to customizable products like that, having an effective drop ship system in place could actually be wonderful for smaller vendors, because it allows us to compete at a level that that a lot of other big box stores just can't.
I do think that drop ship is growing, and once again, the onus is on the vendor to me. How is this vendor really approaching this? Are they approaching it to me as a valued part of that exposure, where I am actually the focus of it, or is their focus just to get it out there so that they can sell on Amazon? So I think that's something that they have to consider.
Historically, just if we're in the category or in the item, we have stock on it.
Right.
Because I do feel like there is that element of the consumer coming in, wanting to make that purchasing decision right then and there and leave with it. You do see a little bit more resistance when they're coming in, making the purchase, only to have it show up at their house a couple days later.
Right.
However, most of the feedback, let's say it's an item we're out of stock on or whatever, and that customer comes in, they're very appreciative usually of the expertise,
Right.
That you can offer. So they may be or are willing to wait a couple of days or wait a week or wait 2 weeks to get the product because they value what you offered in the equation.
Right. I'm getting a sense that while some of you may be reluctant because of the dynamics of your store and the experience, but that the idea of drop ship is probably going to keep coming up in conversations more, and you'll find a way perhaps to make that a value add, if you will, to your business. So